Hi, I'm Jeff, and welcome to another video where I give you the opportunity to test your comic book grading skills up against actual results from CGC. Well, kind of. This is another kind of spin on the usual format of these types of videos. In this video, I'm going to do a reacts video. And this reacts video is in reaction to a video that CGC put out just about 2 months ago, where they gave a little bit of detail and information about the grading process through the grading of a copy of The Incredible Hulk 181 that they did. I was so happy when I saw that CGC made this video, because what they're trying to do is to be a little bit more transparent in their grading process. And that is exactly why I started making these videos in the first place, because I felt like they weren't very transparent. And now they're starting to give us a little bit more of an insight into how they go about grading a comic book. Now, however, this video is very good. I feel like there was a little bit of information and context that they lacked in the video. So with this video, we're going to go through it and we are going to talk about some of the things that they kind of touch on briefly, but we're going to do it in a little bit more detail. Okay, let's get started by checking out the video right now.
Hi, I'm Matt Nelson, primary grader at CGC.
All right, everybody, that's Matt Nelson. That is my buddy, as I like to say, Matt Nelson. If you've been watching my videos, especially my follow-up video to my CGC unboxing nightmare, you know that I had some interactions with Matt Nelson when it came to the repair, I will call it, and grading of my copy of X-Men 266 after it was damaged in shipping coming back to me from CGC. I have to say, Matt Nelson seems to be a really good guy. He responded very quickly to my emails. He was very pleasant. He was very thorough. I have a lot of respect for Matt Nelson, and it seems like in a lot of ways he's kind of the face of grading at CGC, so I felt very happy that he was helping my book, even though it didn't come out the way, I was hoping to get a higher grade on the book. I still feel like he was looking out for me. So thumbs up for Matt Nelson. Fun facts.
Collectors often ask us how we grade comics. So we thought, in the spirit of transparency and to have a little fun, we'd show you exactly how we do it. Today, we're going to be grading a copy of Incredible Hulk 181. It's the first appearance of Wolverine, came out in 1974, and this is one of the most popular comic books among collectors.
Whoa, okay. So, because this is test your comic book grading skills, I am going to hide the grade from you at this point. So no spoilers here, Matt. I want you, through the process of him explaining how he goes about giving the book a grade, to kind of think, well, what would I grade the book as? Now, you're not going to see the book in a ton of detail, so you're not going to be able to give it the most accurate guess that you probably could if they showed you the front and the back of the book before he started the grading process. But I just want you to kind of be thinking about it and thinking about your own grading expectations as he goes through and grades the book and its individual components. So like I said, I'm going to hide the grade and censor it out whenever it pops up in the video. It's not too bad.
As you can see, we've graded it a 3.5 with off-white pages, and I'm going to show you how we arrived at that grade. When I grade a comic book, I use a checklist. There's a first impression.
Okay, so first impression. The one thing I want to say about first impression, press your comic books. I have decided that basically every comic book that I'm going to submit for grading needs to go through a press first. No matter how perfect a book might seem off the rack, there's always something that is going to be pressable to help the book out. Whether it's some waviness in the cover, whether it's a slight indentation somewhere. I do not want to be somebody who sends a book to CGC, have it come back a 9.6, and ask myself, should I have pressed that? would that have gotten a 9.8 if I had pressed that? I don't want to ask myself that question. So I say, press every book that you send to CGC. I call it grade insurance. I think what it will do is it will help with this first impression that Matt here just referred to. If they see a book and they see a flat, beautiful, perfect book, their first impression is, this is a pretty good book. That looks really nice. That's going to help your grade, rather than, oh, I see flaws already. Then that is going to hurt the overall impression of the grader toward your book. And since grading is so subjective, I think that this element of grading is a very important one. So keep that in mind when you're submitting. Really hardcore consider pressing every single book.
Then identifying any variance or pedigree.
So I don't understand why he talks about variance or pedigree when it comes to grading a book. I think it's a bit of information that goes on the label, but I really don't think it's relevant to the grade as we consider it of the book.
Followed by a page count.
Page count is something that we often overlook, and I know for I don't think I've ever gone through a book and counted the pages, but it is not a bad idea to do that at all, especially on higher value books and older books as well. Now, the typical page count for a book is 32, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in this video when we see Matt actually count the pages, but the typical count is 32. Basically, it just needs to be, but it can be varying, can be 24 sometimes, could be 48. Basically, it's always a number divisible by 4. Okay, so keep that in mind as you're looking through books and you decide to do a page count.
And then assigning the page quality.
All right, so page quality. We haven't really talked about page quality much in my videos. It's really something that I kind of sort of take for granted. I'm kind of like, it's gonna be what it's gonna be. There's not much I can do about that, and it really doesn't impact me that much. But the fact is, especially on older books, the difference between a white and an off-white to white and an off-white, I mean, that can make the difference between if you're looking to resell an older book, it being sold or not. I know that I would much rather have a book with white pages than not. How is that determined? Well, Overstreet put out something called the OWL card, or the Overstreet Whiteness Level card. This card can be used to check the whiteness of your book. Now, oftentimes in fact, the whiteness of a book varies. It's often darker along the edges because a lot of people didn't store their books in bags and boards, and they got a lot of oxygen, especially on the edges, which caused browning of the paper. And sometimes in between the panels, in the middle of a page, it'll look pretty white. I think that's kind of sort of take an average of that. But Matt does something later in this video that we're going to talk about a little bit more, which I found a little bit interesting and potentially enlightening when it comes to you determining the whiteness level of your own book. I'm not exactly sure where you can get an OWL card. They might come in the Overstreet guide, but of course Overstreet guides aren't cheap. Basically, I think you're just this is something that you can learn through practice. I wouldn't print something off the computer though, because that might be a little bit iffy depending on your ink settings and stuff like that. Anyways, let's move forward.
Then I do a detailed restoration check.
Okay, so restoration checks, this is something that is really kind of more for the experts. It's not something that I know that I am as good at, but there are certain things that you can look out for. And I will say that CGC has put out a second video in this series that does a lot of detailed work toward enlightening restoration issues. Not all of them, but some of them. Now, what I will mention is that there are 11 different types of restoration that are like common restoration things. I'm going to list them really fast here. There's color touch, there's piece fill, there's tear seals, there's spine split seals, there's reinforcement, reattachment, cleaning, staple replacement or cleaning, reglossing, glue, and trimming. Now I'd read all of these, but I think this video would be too long if I read all of them. If you're interested in reading all the detailed information, just pause and go ahead and give this section a read. But these are the type of things it's good to know what these 11 things are so that you know what to potentially look for when you're looking to buy a raw comic.
And then assess all the defects to arrive at a final grade.
Basically what we call grading. This is basically what I've been doing in my videos, is just this last part where we assess all the defects and assign it a grade.
So let's go grade this comic book.
Yeah, let's go.
To start with, a clean workspace is very important. That involves a flat table that has no clutter, no food or drink. Also equally as important is the lighting. And the best kind of lighting is natural lighting, which can be achieved by combining incandescent and fluorescent light. Magnification is also important, and here I have my trusty loupe to examine the comic book, particularly small areas when I was looking for restoration or small defects.
Okay, so not all of us have a loupe or a magnifying glass to look at comic books, but here's kind of what I use as kind of a hack for this tool. I use my phone's camera, like I do in my videos. There have been times, there was a light bulb I found that was in my yard lighting, and I couldn't read the writing on it to save my life. It was way too small, and I have pretty good eyes. I took a picture of it with my phone, and I blew it up, and boy howdy could I read that. It magnified things so well. So as long as you get it in focus, which is important, don't get the camera lens so close that you can't get focus. Make sure you don't go within minimum focus, as they call it. Get the picture in focus, and you can blow that up a lot and use that as potentially as a hack or replacement for a magnifying glass. Keep that in mind.
It's also important to point out that CGC graders do not wear gloves when grading because it interferes with touching the book. That tactile aspect is just as important as the visual aspect, especially when checking spines for glue, and also touching the cover for substance or reglossing, or even checking the flexibility of paper.
Now, back in the beginning of 2020, back when comic book conventions were still a thing, there was a CGC grader, it might have actually even been Matt, who graded a book, and I believe it was Comic Tom recorded it and showed that on Instagram. And people went nuts. Like, they were so irate because the grader was not using gloves. Now, this was a high-value book, and they were like, I cannot believe that grader was not using gloves. Those fingerprints are getting all over that book. Well, here's the deal. I would always recommend, whether you're grading a book or even just reading a book, wash your hands first. There is no substitute for just clean, dry hands. You do not need gloves when your hands are clean and dry. In fact, gloves can sometimes, you lose some of the tactile sensation that he mentioned to check for restoration at his point, but sometimes you just might not handle a book as carefully when you can't feel it in your hands as well. Referring to that video back to the convention real fast, the thing that triggered me about that video was not the lack of gloves, but when he was counting pages, he was basically bending each page as he was very quickly flipping through them, and I could see them landing not flat, but with a slight curl. And I'm like, you don't want the pages to have a curl. Maybe you should be more careful in your flipping of pages. And I worried less about the fact that he wasn't wearing gloves. But it was an interesting video, and it blew up the comic book community there for a minute.
So my first impression of this copy is that it's not a high-grade copy. It's more mid to low grade, and that's due to several defects I'm seeing on the front cover. It includes a piece out at the corner, some creasing on the cover that breaks color, spine stress lines that also break color, and a large light stain in the logo.
This stain is really, really interesting for me, and it brings up an interesting point. I have a hard time seeing this stain, but the CGC graders do see it. And what it reminds me of is that sometimes there are defects that are very difficult to observe, but they're there, and the CGC people see them. For example, in my own experience, my copy of X-Men 266 had that crease in the bottom right-hand corner, if you remember from my follow-up video for my CGC unboxing nightmare. That crease, I have to work so hard to see that crease. It is near impossible for me to see. but it's there, and it absolutely impacted the grade negatively. It is why it is so important when you're grading your comics that you don't just kind of sort of look at it, that you make sure you look at it in lots of detail under really great light. Oh, and if it's an important enough book, over and over and over again, because these types of defects are going to hurt your grade. And he will talk about this stain later in the video and its impact on the grade, and it is no joke. So for every time that you're like, but this book looked perfect to me, why did it get the bad grade that it got? It might be because it had a flaw that you didn't see because you're not an expert, that they did see.
On the back cover, I noticed several creases to the bottom corner and also to the top corner, and also some light soiling and staining as well. Now I'm going to count the pages. This step is very important because if a comic book is missing any pages, wraps, or coupons from the interior, it can adversely affect the value. This copy of Hulk 181 has 16 pages, and so we'll start from the back and begin counting the interior pages. 1, 2, 14, 15, and 16. So all 16 pages are there.
Okay, so first off, I want to just point out that he was flipping those pages much more carefully than in that Instagram video that I mentioned just a minute ago. But he also counted pages to 16. And earlier I said that typically comic books have 32 pages. Well, what he wasn't counting was that each page has 2 sides. So that's where the number 32 comes from. But he was counting each kind of flap, each kind of piece of paper that went by, not its 2 sides, which is why he came up with the count of 16. Also keep in mind, he is not including in the count the cover, okay? Just something to pay attention to.
Which makes this copy complete. It's important to point out that every copy of Hulk 181 has a Marvel value stamp on page 10. Oftentimes the stamp is cut out, and if it is, it can adversely affect the grade of the book.
Oh boy, howdy, it can. I would never, ever buy a copy of Hulk 181 that did not have the Marvel value stamp in it. It just wouldn't be for me. Now, it's good to know, it's hard, the list of books that have Marvel value stamps in it is long. In fact, there are 307 different books that had Marvel value stamps in them. So there are resources where you can find lists for them. I will put down in the description a link to a page that has a list of all 307 books that had Marvel value stamps in them. But if you don't have access to the list when you're looking at a book in particular, just keep in mind they were in select Marvel books that came out between March 1974 and December 1975. So at the very least, if you're looking at a Marvel book from that time frame, you could maybe consider flipping through it and making sure that if it had a Marvel value stamp in it, that it hasn't been cut out. Just something to keep in mind.
Now I'm going to perform a restoration check. The most common restoration found on Hulk 181 is color touch, which is usually on the spine or somewhere on the front cover. I'm looking at all the creases and spine stress lines, and I see that they're still white, which means that no one has used any color to fill those spots in. So I don't think this copy has any color touch. Next, I'm going to run my thumb up and down the spine to check for glue, any hardness or crustiness. I don't feel any, which rules out spine splits or any staple reattachments. I've also evaluated the edges of the comic book and determined that this comic is not trimmed. I'm now going to check the centerfold, especially the staple area, to see if the staples have been disassembled or taken out. This is very important for Hulk 181 because, as we pointed out, the Marvel value stamp is often missing from page 10, and sometimes people will take the book apart and actually replace the entire wrap. If that's the case, the book will receive a qualified grade, which can adversely affect its value. One common printing defect that's found on many copies of
Okay, so as far as the center, listen, I could see very easily if I had a copy of Hulk 181 that had the Marvel value stamp cut out, because it is such a common defect in a lot of way and one that can impact the value so significantly. If I had an otherwise beautiful copy of Hulk 181, I would absolutely find the most beat up copy of Hulk 181 I could find and replace that page if I was an unhonest person. But I'm not an unhonest person, so I wouldn't do that. However, there are a lot of unhonest people out there, and when it comes to having a book be worth potentially thousands of dollars more just by replacing that page, people might really consider doing that. So what you want to look for is you want to make sure that the pages kind of line up, because all pages aren't cut the same. So you want to make sure that if they use the same holes where the previous staples were in that page, that page should not be offset from the rest of the pages. It should line up evenly with all those pages because they were all cut together originally. Conversely, if you look into the centerfold and it seems like there are extra holes punched there where maybe a previous staple was or should have been, that's another indicator that this is potentially a Frankensteined together copy of the book, and it's something to look out for. Okay, he was talking about a common defect.
Hulk 181 is an ink smear often found in the middle part of the spine that can also extend to the bottom part. How this ink smear affects grade depends on the severity of the smear and also the grade of the comic book otherwise. As you can see, this copy does not have the ink smear.
Okay, so he was discussing a common defect that Hulk 181s have that this book in particular doesn't have, which is that ink smear. Now, I wanted to pause for a second to point out that a lot of times people say, well, isn't that a printing defect? It won't affect the grade. Well, maybe. Sometimes, as he just said, it depends on the severity of it. Now, printing defects will absolutely keep you out of the 10.0 and the 9.9 category. That's basically common known that your book needs to be manufactured perfectly as well as being in perfect condition to get a 9.9 or a 10.0. But sometimes these types of defects can potentially impact the grade negatively, even if it's a 9.8 or below. It's absolutely something that they factor in when grading as potentially something that they are going to let go, but it also has the potential to affect the grade negatively. So just because it is a printer defect does not necessarily mean that it will not be considered negatively by CGC for grading.
I'm now going to assess page quality, one of the things we identify on the CGC label. This particular page appears white in the middle, but it has a bit of a halo around the edge that's dark. And so based on those two factors combined, I'm going to assign a page quality of off-white.
Okay, so he said it appears white in the middle, but has that halo haze around the edge. And when I first was watching this, I was like, okay, he's going to give it an off-white to white, because the edge is, I guess, off-white if the center is white. But I guess he decided, and it was unclear for me to tell in the video if this is accurate or not, but I guess he decided that the halo, the browning, the discoloration along the edge of the book was just too far gone for him to go into the off-white to white category, even though the center of the book was white. So he decided to give it a page quality of off-white. That was enlightening to me, because I always thought that they would kind of take an average, which I believe they do maybe to a certain degree. But if those edges are just too far gone for them, doesn't matter how white that center section is, he's going to call it off-white. Keep that in mind.
Now I'm going to assess all the defects on this comic book to show how we arrived at the grade. Sometimes a comic book will have one or two major defects, and other times it will have an accumulation of smaller defects, like this copy. We'll start with the missing piece off the corner. A piece this size that's missing typically will lower a comic book to around 6.0.
Okay, so that piece that was missing off that book made that book an instant 6.0. That is something to absolutely remember. When I'm looking at books that are raw, I don't care how good they look otherwise. If they are missing a piece, even a relatively small piece, it's not for me, unless it's just an amazing book at an amazing price. But I'm not interested in a book that is missing a piece and therefore becomes an instant 6.0, regardless of its other condition issues. Missing pieces and tears are deadly to grading. So keep that in mind when you're purchasing your raw books.
But clearly there are other things going on with this book. Next, bringing in the creases and the spine stress lines, that's going to drop the book down to about a 4.5.
Okay, so the spine stresses and the color breaks reduce the grade another 1.5. So how I kind of translate that is that if you have an otherwise perfect book, that's going to, these types of defects, just the spine defects alone, just those color breaking spine ticks alone in that number to that severity will drop the book down to an 8.5. Now, if I saw a book myself that had those defects and the rest of the book was just perfect, there seems to be a decent amount of them there. I would actually put that grade at an 8.0. Which is a little bit more of a deduction than he seemed to give it here for this book. But I just want to point out that one of the first things I look at when I grade a book that looks like it's in pretty good shape is how many color breaking spine stresses are there and how significant are there. If there's a handful of them and they're not too bad, to me, that is usually an 8.5. If there are a decent amount of them and they're noticeable, that to me is when it falls into the 8.0 category. But it was interesting to hear him give it a minus 1.5 for the ones that he saw there. Keep that in mind when you're grading all of your books. 1.5 at least for a fair amount, deduction I should say, for a fair amount of color breaking spine ticks.
And finally, the stain in the logo is going to bring it down to a 3.5.
Whoa. That stain that I could barely see, like, I mean, you look at the image and you can barely see it. You can probably just see it up close and with the right lighting, took it down a whole 1.0. That means that if you have a perfect copy of something and it has a barely perceptible stain on it, that's an instant 9.0. That is very much something to keep in mind. It reminds me once again how these sometimes hard to perceive or potentially imperceptible defects can impact your grade significantly. So keep your eyes peeled for those types of hard to see defects because they will ding you in the end.
Once you bring all of those defects together. So there you have it. That's how I arrived at a 3.5 grade with off-white pages on this Hulk 181. So I encourage you to apply these concepts to your own comic books when submitting them to CGC, to test yourself. I did this for many years before I joined the team. Make sure to follow CGC on social media. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe. And if you have any questions about the grading process, make sure to leave it in the comments section because we're going to be answering questions in future videos. Thanks for watching. See you soon.
I will put the link to this video down in the description. I definitely recommend that you go and you follow this link to the CGC page on YouTube and you watch the video in its entirety if you feel like it, but definitely give it a like and definitely subscribe and hit the notification bell. CGC needs to be encouraged to make more of these types of videos. This video was fantastically enlightening to me when it comes to certain grading criteria that CGC has. I want to see a million more of these videos because like what I'm trying to do with my Test Your Comic Book Grading Skills videos, these types of videos will educate us on what type of things affect grades, and the more of these types of things that we see in videos like this and hopefully also videos like mine, the better, smarter, more talented and what's the word I'm looking for? Just the better grader you're going to be and the more confident submitter you're going to be to CGC. I'm so glad that CGC made this video. And once again, I remind you that there's a second video where they talk about restoration. And later, I will be doing a react video to that as well. But I have a lot less to say about that because I'm no expert on grading, but I'm definitely no expert on restoration. But I do think that it's an interesting video and a fun one to kind of talk about in this context. Well, thank you so much for watching this video here today. I hope you found it entertaining and enlightening. And if you did, I would really appreciate a like. Likes are great. Likes are a fantastic way to show your support for me and for the channel. If this is the first one of my videos that you're watching, I thank you so much for watching this video. You should go back and watch some of my other videos. I would start with this one right up there. It's a great place to start, and then watch a lot of my other Test Your Comic Book Grading Skills videos. I would also invite you to subscribe. Hit the subscribe guy right there, and hit the notification bell so that you're informed when I post new videos. As always, thank you all so much for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.